Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, British serial killer thriller The Echo Man by Sam Holland. Now, I think serial killer books are interesting because they can fall into either the horror genre or the crime genre. And as someone who loves both of those genres, it's always interesting for me to read a serial killer book and try and figure out which one of those it's going to slot into. I recently read another serial killer book, Letters to the Purple Satin Killer by Joshua Chaplinsky, which I would definitely say was horror. The Echo Man, I think, is definitely crime. This definitely feels to me like a crime book, like a crime thriller. It's a really tense, gripping, enjoyable book. And the word enjoyable can be a strange one to use when you're talking about serial killers, when you're talking about people who do the most horrific things. And certainly there are many horrific things described in this book. But there's something about watching that pursuit, about watching the cops going after a monster, which is, always gripping and entertaining. It's that kind of rooting for the good guys kind of thing that I think serial killer books can do really, really well. They can be, completely grim and horrible, and sometimes it's appropriate for them to be like that. That's not the case with The Echo Man. There is a lot of violence in here, but it doesn't dwell on that violence. And I think that can be one of the key points that determines whether a serial killer book or movie falls into the horror genre or the crime genre. For me, horror shows you the violence. It's often, focuses on the violence, whereas crime is more often about the aftermath of the violence. It's about the investigation, and that's definitely true with The Echo Man. So the other thing that I think is interesting about this book, or interesting to me anyway, as someone in the UK, is that it's set in Britain, and in fact it's set reasonably locally to me. It's set in Southampton, which isn't that far away from me. I think British serial killer books sometimes struggle to feel credible. And that isn't to say that we haven't had some terrible serial killers in the UK. We certainly have. But it feels like much more of an American thing to me. There are certainly, more serial killers, and certainly more very famous serial killers in the US than in any other country pretty much. But also in terms of the serial killer as entertainment, when you think about, serial killer TV shows and movies and books, they are much more likely, the big ones, the ones you immediately think of, tend to be set in the US. So I think there can be a difficulty for books set in the UK, especially something like this, which is set in a city. So it's set, in a city, in an enclosed area, for it to make it credible that someone has been operating for that long without being detected by the police. And I think that's something that Sam Holland did a good job of in this book. It does feel believable. But also it does have that kind of almost like a veneer of entertainment to it. It feels a lot at times like a TV show in terms of the pacing of it. Some of the plot points, some of the characters, it's got that kind of TV show vibe to it. And as a result, it's really gripping and entertaining stuff. So let me tell you what it's actually about. So it's about a serial killer who is nicknamed the Echo Man. And the reason they're nicknamed the Echo Man is because they are replicating, copying the crimes of historical famous serial killers. So it's a nice setup for a book, and it allows Sam Holland to to have a quite wide variety of different kind of murders and MOs and things like that. So you've got the serial killer who's operating, and you've got the group of cops who are investigating that. So there are two main cops, one called Cara, a female detective, and one called Griffin, who's a male detective who's like the kind of bad boy. He borders on being cliched, but he's really, really enjoyable to read. So I didn't mind that at all. So he's got a troubled past. He's kind of, I think he's been suspended from the force for a while and things like that because of like things he's done that were a bit sketchy. But he's a great character to read, and he gets involved in the investigation as well. And then the other thing that's really, really interesting about this book is there's another character who isn't a cop, who isn't immediately involved in the investigation. So a woman called Jess, and she's got a story that at the start of the book kind of runs in parallel to the investigation, about a terrible upheaval that happens in her life, and she has to go on the run basically as a result of that. And as the book progresses, she kind of interacts with some of the other characters and does become involved in the investigation. And I thought that was a really, really good technique. So partly it's because it gives you two plot lines to focus on. So there's always something interesting going on, because even if the part of the story you're feeling, maybe feels like it's dragging a tiny bit, that soon you're going to flip back to the other half of the book, and get, find out what's going to happen next, find out the resolution to the last cliffhanger in that storyline. So partly you've got that, but also because she becomes like our eyes on the investigation. She's not a cop, she's an amateur, she's a civilian. So it's interesting to see her reflecting on the investigation as it progresses. So I thought her inclusion as a character is what makes this book as enjoyable as it is. I think without her it wouldn't be as good. So yeah, it's a really fun read. It's got engaging, quite complex characters at times. They've all got different things going on in their lives. It's got an evil serial killer at the heart of it. And it's got tons of twists and turns and some interesting, kind of investigative technique as well. So definitely a book that I think crime fans, and particularly serial killer thriller fans, will enjoy. So I hope you found that interesting. If you read The Echo Man or any of Sam Holland's other books, do let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.